Welcome to the day three, in spite of what you might have seen on the slides, day three of the 16th International Symposium on Talent Education. For those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Pat Coley, and my co-coordinator is Kate Enerson. Kate, if you want to say hello.
Sure. Thank you, as always, to those of you who can join us in real time today for our keynote presentation. And thank you also to any of you who are watching this recording after the fact. We're excited to wrap up our 2022 series of events today.
And so we want to, as you all know by now, with all the Zooming that we've done, to stay muted until we get to the question and answer session. If our Dr. Hendricks is coming to us from Norway today, so if we have some video issues, we may even stop everyone's video so that we can preserve our bandwidth. As you have questions, if you want to type them into the chat, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we should have some time after. And so let me introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Karen Hendricks joined the Boston University faculty in 2015. She had previous appointments at the University of Illinois and Ball State University. She has taught courses in instrumental music education, research, sociology, psychology of music, music and social justice, and contemporary and alternative approaches to music learning. Dr. Hendricks has served in many state and national and international music education leadership positions as well. Her research interests include social psychology and diversity, equity, and inclusion in music learning context with a particular focus on student engagement. She has published in 17 peer-reviewed journals. She has 6 books, including Compassionate Music Teaching, Performance Anxiety Strategies, and 4 edited volumes on music and well-being. And she's also the editor of the forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Care in Music Education. So before moving to university teaching, Karen enjoyed a successful public school orchestra career for 13 years, where she won many awards for her excellence in music education. We are especially proud to have her with us today because Karen was part of the International Research Symposium and served as a part of our research group, as well as serving as co-coordinator from 2012 to 2016. As I said, she's coming to us today from Bergen, Norway, where she's presenting at a conference there. So we're very pleased that you have the time and found the time to make for us give us this presentation on exercising empathy the Suzuki way. Please help me welcome Dr. Karen Hendricks.
Thank you very much. As Pat has so beautifully said, I have a wonderful history with this organization that means so much to me and has for a very long time. And I had hoped to be meeting with you today from the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, and my bus broke down. And so I'm here in the hotel room. And so that's why we're concerned about bandwidth. They had just done a remarkable job there in setting me up with a private room with my own key and everything. And here we are with making sure that the pillows don't show. So I appreciate your patience with that. But as we know, we're all loving and nurturing teachers, and we know that improvisation is always a part of the game. So I appreciate that very much. So you should now be seeing my screen. Wonderful. Okay. As I said, I have such love and respect for the International Research Symposium on Talent Education. I've worked with these tremendous people for many, many years, and I found that IRSTE folks really get what Suzuki was and is all about. Kindness, attention to detail, genuine care for and about others, a love of fine musicianship and of students. And this symposium offers a wonderful way to consider research that supports music ability development with compassion. Much of my present scholarly work has been influenced by my interactions with this organization. I remember well, for instance, attending a keynote given by Laurel Trainer on the relationship between rhythmic synchrony and pro-social behavior in young children. This work inspired some of us in the EARSTI research group to conduct research on empathy. And because a catalyst for a chapter in my book, Compassionate Music Teaching, as well. I love this organization. I love this topic, and I'm so glad to be here today. Most of the presentations at this research symposium are empirical in nature. Lots of talk of data, methods, findings. My talk today is part empirical, but also part philosophical, part historical, part theoretical, part critical, part narrative, and hopefully a good part practical, which seemed to me to be befitting of a conversation of Suzuki, who was all of these things. Much of my talk today focuses on Suzuki's philosophies, particularly his emphasis and prioritization of kindness and respect, or as he might say, nurturing with love. Well known are Suzuki's philosophies on talent education, that every child can learn and succeed, provided they are given the right environment. That's what this symposium is all about, finding ways to create such environments. Another critical element of Suzuki's philosophy, though, relates to using music and teaching music as a means of forging authentic connections, what I've defined as a sense of musical, emotional, or even spiritual attunement with others. Suzuki spoke of this kind of connection as occurring through musical performance, as one connects with another through musical expression. The authentic connection Suzuki spoke of involves two primary factions. First, one is believed to connect with another through the technical production of a resonant musical tone. And second, the quality of that connection is affected by a person's own dignity of character, which Suzuki posited could be discerned through the tone one produced. So I'd like to look first today at how tone connects people. How is this even possible? Suzuki teacher trainers have described this experience, and you should now be able to see a quote. Did we change slides? Okay, we did. Great. So I will let you read that quietly. And I should say, I'm letting you read this quietly, but if that is, if anyone would prefer that I read them out loud for any reason, please do let me know. I'm happy to do that for you. Here, our own Pat has described this connection this way. Please just put in the chat if you prefer I read these. Because of this importance of this connection to Suzuki, he stressed both aspects on a continual basis, not only emphasizing the production of a resonant tone through meticulous detail to technical instruction, but also in the second way, by emphasizing the development of the heart, in addition to the development of the fingers and ears. Suzuki said this. Suzuki emphasized both technical production and development of character in lessons and in homework. He taught students not only to understand the intent of composers, of the music they learned, but to learn sensitivity, what we might call, and we will call today, empathy for the feelings and needs of others. Here is one example of Suzuki's homework assignment. You can see a lot of layers in this, that we start with an understanding of what it might be, to understand what someone else might feel. And then later, perhaps you can catch the hearts of Bach and Mozart in their music. Suzuki's student and frequent house guest, Yuko Handa, described how important this form of character development and sensitivity toward others was for Suzuki. She said this: you can see in this, we would try to take the dishwashing job. We felt dishwashing was less attractive and drying dishes a little more pleasant. So this awareness of what other people might appreciate, based, of course, on one's own understanding. So there is this connection here for us to think about how we might consider what others might need or want. So I'd love for us to pause for a moment and consider, where are we now as Suzuki teachers, and as music teachers in general, if we're not Suzuki teachers? What is our purpose for teaching music? What are our priorities and why? I have some quotes to share with you as we reflect, and I'm going to read these ones. One day, the principle of talent education, based on the way we learn our mother tongue, will certainly change the course of education. No one will be left behind, and based on love, it will foster truth, joy, and beauty as a part of a child's character. Or this, attributed to Pablo Casals: this is what has impressed me most in this country, the superlative desire of the highest things in life, and how wonderful it is to see that the grown-up people think of the smallest, meaning children, smallest like this, as to teach them to begin with the noble feelings, with the noble deeds. I hope we remember this as we go on. It's smart with the, think of the smallest like this as to teach them to begin with noble feelings, noble deeds. And then Michelle Higa George: what does any of this that we're doing today, teaching, have to do with Dr. Suzuki's original goal of developing fine human beings with noble hearts? And then Suzuki's words again: there are people who think that art exists for its own sake, but I do not think so. Art exists for the human species. I think that all of the people who love art, those who teach art, and all of you should burn with the obligation to save the world. It is necessary to be concerned about the importance of educating a really beautiful human spirit. And another Suzuki quote here: teaching intonation and teaching technique will never be more than a method. We are burning with a deeper mission that we must do something for the future. And Pat, again, with her words here: in the fervor of the moment, right upon Suzuki's passing, these words she wrote: in our sorrow because of our loss, our commitment to this dream is most strong. In time, our fidelity will be tested, however. It will be tested by the passage of time. How good will we be at perpetuating Dr. Suzuki's vision? Will we be able to hold on to the dream without his person and charisma reminding us of it? Now we are holding the baton, and it is time to rededicate ourselves to be the role model, the inspiration, the noble spirit for all those in our sphere of influence. Then, child by child, family by family, program by program, we will become the instruments of compassion and peace that Dr. Suzuki was himself. So beautiful, Pat. Now, Estelle Jorgensen, a music education philosopher: breaking out of the restrictive ideas and practices of the past is not done to disparage the status quo, just for the sake of doing so. Rather, the commitment to learning provides clear reasons for transforming music education by finding better ways of musical instruction, creating a richer musical culture, and fostering greater happiness, nobility, sensitivity, and understanding in those who are involved in or affected by its work. So let's start today by doing some self-reflection and chatting with one another. And I'm looking at how many participants we have. And we're right on the cusp of, do we want to say something or chat? I'm going to give you an option to either write in the chat or raise your hand if you want to use the raise your hand feature. As you do this, I invite you to think about reflections or reactions you have to each of these quotes. And I'm going to toggle back so you can see them again. What comes to mind for you with these? What does a certain quote remind you of? How do you try to do these things? How might you do better? Write or speak whatever you'd like, whatever you feel you have to share with the group. And if that is nothing and you'd rather write it on your own piece of paper, we totally respect that. But while you do, I'll rotate back and forth between the slides of quotes so you can reflect on what you might say. My plan is to take about 5 minutes for this, so no rush. Take some time to really think. I will look for raised hands, and Pat and Kate, if you can help with that as well too. But open up the chat box if you'd prefer to write there. Okay, great. And we do have some saying that they will, for safety's sake, Danette, we completely appreciate that. Because we do want you teaching for a good long time. So that's what you can do in this moment, is to stay safe for us. So we're going to go back, and here's the first slides. And Danette, you did hear these, but I will remind us, we have one on Suzuki talking about what the talent education principle might be, what no one will be left behind. We have Pablo Casal's famous quote about what's going on and thinking about the highest things in life. Michelle George reminding us, are we really remembering that Suzuki's original goal was developing fine human beings? And then, why does art exist? Suzuki asks us. It exists for humans. Suzuki reminding us that we have a deeper mission to do something for the future. And then Pat reminding us that, you know, as Suzuki passed away, we were so attuned to this mission. Are we still? And then Estelle reminding us that it takes some work and some thought to break out of ideas we've held on to in the past, but how might we have a commitment to learning that involves transforming music education by finding better ways that include a richer musical culture, fostering happiness, nobility, sensitivity. So go ahead and write in the chat if you'd like what strikes you about any particular quote. Please choose one and talk with us a little bit about what that means to you and why. Can't see if we have any raised hands. I'm going to toggle through and see. I don't think anyone's used that chat feature. Okay, Kate has started off for us. Thank you, Kate. We find ourselves at yet another moment of transformation and reinvention. After all that is the change and upheaval of 2020, 2022. Okay, now I did give you an option to just reflect on your own. I'm going to give you 1 more minute. Yes, Pat. Pat, you're on mute there.
I'm better at speaking it than writing it in the chat. And I think I get recommitted to this vision every time I hear of another mass shooting or the war in Ukraine. And it just reminds me of Dr. Suzuki saying, we haven't become more civilized, we've just become more, we've progressed in how we've made killing more convenient. We've gone
Yeah.
from sticks and stones in the Stone Age to, to bombs and stuff. And it just re- renews me again in that this idea that eventually we'll have more people in this world who are Suzuki trained, who have been exposed to this idea, and will, wherever they are, make their corner of the world twinkle. And I just think that this is just so important what we do.
Thank you. And Kate is mentioning Jorgensen's point, Estelle's point. Change takes effort, and we have to recommit to doing the work. Yeah, okay. And Tim Eckert, good to see you, Tim. School's loud. All right, that's beautiful. We love loud schools. I think my students with learning challenges who really struggle with piano probably won't finish the books, but who I believe will still learn a lot. Yeah, yeah. Glenda, lack of empathy creates great suffering for humanity and the planet. It's the same skills and sensitivity required to produce a good tone that are needed to listen to people. Yes, that's what we're talking about here with Suzuki. Educating children to have these skills will help them become more empathic, hopefully creating a more peaceful world who will not add to the suffering. Lily says, at my work, when department talk about our strategic goal, I'm often annoyed by the fact that the word joy is not there. The idea that music exists to do stuff, to make kids learn math better, etc., misses the point for me. Yeah. And, it's so funny. We talk so much about motivation, get them to do this, get them to do this. And yet we know that motivation research tells us that if they are doing what they're loving, we don't have to have external motivators. Yet here we are. Sarah, I certainly appreciate instilling a compassionate way of teaching to all students, especially as each student brings their individual needs, talents, and fears, yes, as you spoke about this week, Sarah, to the studio or classroom. Staying compassionate as educators allows us to address our students' uniqueness first, so we can teach them wholly, considering their social, personal, and cultural differences. Y'all, I don't think you need me to do the keynote. I think we're all, we have some wonderful ideas here. It's so thoughtful, and I appreciate that. Okay. Oh, I'm feeling the love. Okay. Anyone else, or should we go on? I'll just give one quick, and feel free to use the chat. We do have the beauty of Zoom, where we can continue conversations. That does not distract me at all. But if you decide you want to make some comments, make it clear if you want me to stop or not. And maybe Pat or Kate can say, hey, wait, Karen, but otherwise I'll just let you continue, and I will not look at the chat, so I can keep going right now. Self-reflection is critical for authentic connection. This connection with another, whether it's musical, otherwise, is not merely attunement to another person. It also involves a sense of authenticity within oneself. How can we be authentic with others if we do not know ourselves? My Boston University students and I took a deeper look at this relationship between self and other awareness in a study we conducted with Danny, a community musician who did work in conflict areas such as Israel, Palestine, and Belfast. And as Danny taught us through her work, one must first be honest with oneself to meet one's own needs and develop self-trust, which then can facilitate better honesty with others, which leads to relational trust and its cousin, authentic connection. Authentic connection in music might be said to involve a process where musicians look inward and outward with self and other awareness. demonstrating willingness to be vulnerable as their authentic selves are exposed and challenged through musical and emotional risk-taking. Suzuki's fervent calls for kindness, love, and development of moral character appear timelier than ever, as Kate has just said, in our current world. This world that's filled with ever-increasing public manifestations of narcissism, self-aggrandizement, and civil discord. My writings on compassion and care in music teaching are inspired profoundly by Suzuki's philosophies, and they focus on the ways in which teachers might view themselves as equals to their students and act with them as co-learners as they engage in music making together. In the compassionate music teaching approach, teachers and students practice qualities of trust, empathy, patience, inclusion, and community to forge authentic connections with one another, with music, with their communities, and within themselves. In the rest of our time together today, we'll focus particularly on the second quality of this compassionate music teaching framework, empathy, to consider how it relates to Suzuki's philosophies and how it might apply to music teaching practices in a world that in many ways looks very different than the one in which Suzuki taught, but in other ways looks much the same. We will reflect on ways that Suzuki's philosophies and pedagogies might aid in the development of different manifestations of what we might associate with empathy in music-making settings, such as relational responsiveness, reciprocity, communal musical engagement. I'll discuss the concept of empathy by addressing what empathy is and is not, types of empathy, and applications of empathy-related concepts to music teaching and learning. And then finally, I will offer a practical example of empathy-related Suzuki pedagogy through a case study of one Suzuki triangle that I was a part of, child, parents, and teacher. Specifically, I'll investigate the proximal development of the empathetic manifestation of responsiveness as facilitated through interactive musical play. If time allows, we'll end with a discussion of ways that current Suzuki teachers might practice and foster the development of empathetic character traits in our teaching, as well as our own character. So it's important when discussing terms such as empathy, compassion, and character development to exercise caution against taking a stance of superiority over anyone else. Who defines, for instance, what good character is or what it looks like? Who is to decide who teaches whom about what it means to have a noble character? Further, taking a purely psychological approach to studying character of any form does not account for the structural or systemic issues that impact people's decisions or abilities to act in certain ways when interacting with others. So let's take a look at these complexities. For example, Suzuki was not the only person in his era to be discussing good character. This was something that music pedagogue Carl Seashore also discussed. You may remember Carl Seashore for the development of music aptitude tests, something that Edwin Gordon took and ran with, changing much of the way that music talent was taught and viewed. Suzuki, of course, viewed talent as something that anyone could develop, and we wouldn't be sitting here today if Suzuki hadn't articulated that. Whereas Gordon proposed that people were born with a particular aptitude that could then be shaped further by the environment. What has heretofore less been understood, but recently brought to light by an impressive tome, this is a huge book by Julia Koza, is how the Seashore-inspired emphasis on aptitude tests was directly related to Seashore's interest in work. It's going to get a little dark here. Seashore's interest in work in the eugenics movement, which used pseudoscience to suggest that people of certain races and skill sets were innately superior to others, and that the human race might be, quote, improved by breeding of so-called superior and elimination of so-called lesser people. This movement was, of course, associated with Nazi Germany, but was also highly influential in the creation of many racist laws, policies, and practices in other countries, particularly the United States. Recently, when I ordered Julia Koza's book on seashore and eugenics for the Boston University Library, the librarian reached out to me in horror and shared with me an autobiography on seashore that had been in our own collections. I skimmed through it, stopping on the words that Seashore wrote, quote, "Some people are born well and others can learn to live well," end quote. And as I read, I learned about Seashore's interest in promoting good human character. My blood turned cold as I thought about my own research on Suzuki for over a decade, where I had simply assumed that good character and noble spirit meant what I thought it meant. Yet here was Seashore, a music education scholar, putting the work of character development in the same instance as a conversation about alleged racial, ethnic, social, or even ability-based superiority. So I sat there for a good long while, doing my best at that self-awareness and honesty practice I showed earlier, asking myself, was I conflating these ideas somehow as well? Was I assuming a stance of moral superiority to think that some people were more in need than others of being taught how to be good, to be compassionate, to be empathetic? Unlike the work of Seashore and other psychologists, I do not see Suzuki's interest in talent development as being related to eugenics. I truly believe, based on my studies of Suzuki, that his interest in musical talent was first and foremost to connect it to character development for the sake of ending the horrors of war. I believe his interest in developing the character of others was further catalyzed by his own interest in improving himself as a human. Suzuki prided himself in being different than the average music educator at the time, especially in proposing that anyone could learn. Yet I am confident that the international conversations about the nature and source of ability influenced his thinking, as they did other music scholars living in that era. Yet it still begs the question, when we talk about character development in tandem with ability development, what exactly we mean. In 2022, our society is far from utopian and is far from being socially just. Speaking for myself, I know I have much work to do in terms of recognizing biases and assumptions in my own self and work, particularly when I have inherited cultural beliefs, practices, and even scholarly findings from a very imperfect past. So I tread very cautiously here as I talk about empathy. For me, empathy must similarly be understood as relating to authentic connection and attunement to another, rather than as a means of taking a morally superior stance to anyone else. As I mentioned in Compassionate Music Teaching, this is a very long quote, so I will let you read it because you would read it faster than I would, and I'll give you the general idea here. Empathy is often understood. We just think everyone should be empathetic to other people, but empathy isn't necessarily positive in and of itself. What empathy can do is it can help us take the perspective of another person so we can imagine or feel what it is like to be them. And then we have the potential to treat others as we would want to be treated ourselves, but only if we choose to act upon these thoughts and feelings in what I call kind and noble ways. And even now, as I read the words I published and wrote myself and published in 2018, I'm cringing at the word noble, a word I undoubtedly chose due to the influence of Suzuki, who used the word noble quite a bit, or at least his English translator did. But now I think, how does that word come across as associating empathy instead to something belonging to aristocracy? I looked up the term noble in the dictionary in preparation for this keynote and see that the synonyms are highborn, highbred, whereas antonyms are baseborn, common, humble. Alas, I can't wait to write a second edition of Compassionate Music Teaching, but we go on. Music education's brilliant critical theorist Juliet Hess has challenged the ethics of empathy as being overly moralistic when one calls upon the term to suggest they understand the difficulty of others who have experienced trauma or oppression, something they cannot truly understand. Yet, by allegedly feeling into the pain of others, they might actually maintain a focus on their own self and stay focused on their own feelings of secondary pain, thereby, quote, stealing the pain of others, end quote, as a means of maintaining control or maintaining a superior position to the other. Authentic empathy, however, requires a letting go of superiority or hero narratives and exercising compassion, not as a badge of morality, but as a way of recognizing common humanity and the need for collaborative action. The way I'm choosing to look at empathy is similar to the way I choose to look at compassion then, as a shared experience and attunement between equals, between two humans who bring different perspectives, experiences, strengths, and curiosities to the learning space. As it was for Suzuki, it is a kind of spiritual connection. The philosopher Martin Buber described an experience of I, thou, or I, you, where when you are truly connected with another person, there is no awareness of any it qualities about the other, but instead you become a unified I, you, I, you. I've drawn on the work of Marissa Silverman to further describe this experience as musical meaningfulness, where Buber's compound pronoun I, you is depicted with a conceptualization of we or us, where the self is a part of the larger us. This experience resonates with the notion of caring connection or compassionate mutuality, in which a caring relationship involves mutual validation, a state of presence with one another, an openness to feelings and emotions, affection, and acts of care that are received with gratitude. Let's look then at various types of empathy. Cognitive empathy, understanding in one's mind what it might be like to be another person. Affective empathy, feeling in our bodies the feelings of another. Compassionate, motivational, or altruistic empathy, where one feels the pain of another enough to want to move to action to support them. This is the one criticized by Juliet Hess, as discussed previously, as getting into the slipperiness of empathy for one's own sake, and leads to the need to understand the next one, which is mature empathy, viewing the experiences of another through that person's worldview and value system. This one gets a lot of attention in compassionate music teaching. I cite Alfie Kohn and George Bernard Shaw saying, quote, "Do not do unto others as you would expect they should do unto you. Their tastes may not be the same." And ask not just what it's like to be in their shoes, but ask what it's like to have their feet. Then there's musical empathy, or the use of music as a means of communicating feelings and experiences with others non-verbally. Kim McCord is writing about this in a forthcoming book. Empathetic attunement in music, or a collective state of flow that can lead to experiences of exploration, risk-taking, and concentration, in addition to heightened communication. And finally, empathetic creativity in music, which is a process of attunement during collaborative creative processes, which can emerge through imitation, entrainment, disinterested pleasure, which is maintaining a collective sense of joy, which we talked about, or flow, while also letting go of a need to control the outcome. Oh my goodness. Let me say that one again. Maintaining collective sense of joy or flow, while also letting go of a need to control the outcome. Flexibility, ambiguity, which ambiguity would be willingness to interpret collaborative musical experiences on an individual basis without having to agree on what it means or how we feel it. Sometimes in this empathic creativity, a sixth experience can happen where people in a group creative process can relate to the experiences of others while also continuing to keep and honor their own musical expressions. This sixth stage might relate to the mature empathy that I talked about earlier, but in an expression of empathy that is particular to group music making. So several years ago, I was inspired by Laurel Trainer's EARSTI keynote talk, so much so that I went to work on several empathy-related projects, including some that were published along with other members of the EARSTI research group. Among other things, we explored the relationship between Suzuki group lessons and manifestations of empathy in Suzuki students. In our exploratory small sample study, we found a correlation between empathy and group lesson participation, but not necessarily the one we anticipated. Rather than group lesson participation leading to higher empathy scores, we found that children with higher empathy scores at the outset of the study were those most likely to persist in group lessons. We also found correlations between higher empathy scores and higher ratings of the importance of music instruction to their family. So we were unable to claim from our research that Suzuki group lessons were the magic pill for promoting positive interrelationships, which we wouldn't have tried to do anyway, given the small sample size. Rather, our research aligned with past research to suggest that a child's personality predicts duration of formal music training, and not surprisingly, that children who were more attuned to the feelings and experiences of others were more likely to be successful and or committed to group music making. This point takes us back to the concept of mature empathy and the importance of understanding the values of others to have authentic connection with them. It also reminds us of the importance of providing music students with activities that match their personalities and interests. About the same time, I began a different exploratory study in my own Suzuki studio with an early childhood cello student and her parents. Considering the Suzuki triangle a particular type of collective adult-child musical interaction, I was interested to see how these lessons might elicit empathy-related behaviors such as responsiveness, emotional vicariousness, cooperation, musical companionship, and social facilitation. Given the young age of the children, I wondered about the role of play in these musical interactions and thought to do the research to build and test a model for that relationship. My theorizing for this model came from research on early childhood, music, play, and pro-social behavior. Free, undirected play has been found to promote social skills such as working in groups, sharing, self-advocacy, negotiation, and resolution of conflicts. Furthermore, play with others may increase positive social behaviors, including social inclusion, anti-exclusion, and awareness of cultural identity and difference. Sheridan highlighted the potential for play to lead to empathetic character traits using these words. In play, children have the opportunity to learn about themselves and others. They become aware of the impact of their behavior and develop skills in conflict resolution, negotiation, trust, and acceptance. They can try out different ways of dealing with social situations and try on feelings, emotions, and social roles. Yet the play cannot be overly controlled or dictated by adults. Ginsberg expressed the importance of child engagement with adults in semi-structured and child-directed play for developing social and emotional skills. Quote, ideally, much of play involves adults, but when play is controlled by adults, children acquiesce to adult rules and concerns and learn some of the benefits play offers them, particularly in developing creativity, leadership, and group skills. Ginsberg further suggested that current societal trends have led to several factors in the reduction of play for children, including an increase in single-parent families, larger workloads, and less multi-generational support for childcare. Ginsburg, similar to earlier writings by Elkind and others, attributed society's apparent need to drive children to ever-increasing levels of achievement for the reduction in free play, advocating return to playfulness in education and family life for the sake of the child's emotional, physical, and social well-being. So in this exploratory study, I hypothesized that the intersections of play and music with adults might lead to empathy-related behaviors. And I thought to engage in qualitative research to inquire about the how. How might such interactions lead to such sensitivity? What might this look like? Qualitative data were collected from the following sources: the teachers' and parents' journals of lesson and home practice activities, content of email correspondence between research my and the students' parents, dealing with comments about child's musical and emotional engagement, videotapes, etc. You can see what's there. I'm going to skip because you can read that. Get to the good stuff. You can see observations and coding were driven by the perception action model, in which empathetic understanding occurs through perception of another that stimulates a cognitive, emotional, or behavioral representation of the emotion or situation in the self. So you can see how I plan to code data here, looking at the different empathy typologies there and empathy-related traits. I intended to also code data by different forms of play, as you can see there, and different types of musical activities. So a lot of different ways to look at the data there. But as I did that, analysis according to a priori typologies can lead to the oversight of potentially rich and important information that might be inherent in the data. It's possible, it's been said that theory alone offers an inadequate basis. Sorry, I was wondering if that was the wrong slide. Theory alone offers an inadequate basis for assessing educational significance. So I wanted, without giving too much away about the ending of this keynote, I also considered analysis for emergent themes as determined through constant comparison. So I want to share with you today one instance in which I observed an apparent development of social skills in Lily as she interacted with her parents and me. First, from my journal. Today, Lily's family, and this is not Lily who's here with us by the way, you'll see. Lily's family surprised me with a special Portland cello project song that they found on the internet. They had listened together and had created an enactment of various animals that appeared in the music. I didn't know beforehand just how interested Lily was in numbers and counting, but with Dad's help, she had determined the counts of changing beat patterns in the song. We had a delightful time dancing and acting out animals as the music played. The bonding was definitely there. And as I stood to pack up my cello, Lily came over and hugged my legs. Yay, I'm thinking, oh yeah, we've arrived. A child hugging my legs after the end of the lesson. At first pass, I noticed Lily's responsive to me, particularly the way she hugged my legs. Somehow I believed I had done something to warrant a hug and a connection, and I naively put this behavior in the category of, quote, adult teaches child to connect with adult. As I coded this entry, I noted instances of cooperative and imitative play as they listened together and practiced counting the beats of mixed meter in the song. Yet there was also plenty of flexibility and structure as Lily acted out various animals in the music. There were also instances of motor physical play and touch, movement to the music, and physical expression of emotional connection. As I observed the video of the same event, I became aware of motor physical play as Lily moved on the floor with teacher and parents either on one floor or with the cello, and you will see this in a minute, and pretend play as she acted out various animals. each of which reflected some aspect of the music itself. Dogs growling at loud parts, bunnies hopping at lighter parts, slow crawling with steady pizzicato sections, etc. However, this time, as I watched the video, I recognized that play was also imitative. She responded to the growls of others who joined with her. The video also made more evident the ways in which adults demonstrated attunement to one another. Dad offered many questions and options, while the parents and teachers connected multiple times through eye contact and smiles. So let's watch the video and you can see which of these things you recognize.
Ready? I'll start it.
Pizzicato at the beginning.
2, 3, 1.
There will be an abrupt stop just to cut. So that will come soon.
Now is it quiet now? Are we the dog again? Is that what you were doing?
It's the blue dog, right? Oh, on the back.
They're still bouncing in the background. Yeah, that's true.
I put this project away for a while as I moved to a new job and took on other responsibilities. And I wrote compassionate music teaching and other pieces on empathy and connection, leaving this study unfinished while deepening my theoretical understandings of these concepts. As I came back to the video clip for this keynote, those new insights came with me, and I realized how one-sided my whole approach had been. Several years ago, I was focused entirely on how 3 adults might teach the child something about pro-social behavior, about listening, about attunement. I was coming from a place of moral superiority, as if the adults had something to teach the child, to somehow help her become a decent human being, as if she wasn't already. It was a very different perspective from what I advocate in compassionate music teaching, where I argue, and it was as was inspired by Suzuki, that compassionate approach involves shared music making with others whom, despite their usually younger age and lesser experience in certain areas, we recognize to be equal to us. Early childhood music expert Diana Dansereau used the compassionate music teaching framework to outline how early childhood music might be reconceptualized as one with children and adults as co-equal music interactors. It involves a presumption of children's musical competence and awareness, far from the philosophies of Carl Seashore we discussed previously, that musical expression is individual and culturally specific. Dansereau proposed that teachers acknowledge the fallibility of their own musical knowledge, and embark with children on explorations into musics that may be unfamiliar to them, meaning the teacher. The teaching approach becomes a pedagogy of relationships wherein the communication of the child and the adult, as well as between the child and the adult, is key. In this space, teachers can become attuned to the communication of children, noticing their levels of engagement and enjoyment. Adjust their musical offerings to honor the children's expressions of agency, make their collaborative intent apparent, and further and deepen the musical engagement. From this new perspective, I now saw how attuned the three of us were to one another. We took cues from one another, with no one really leading or following, but each of us coming to a new musical experience together. More than a process of play and adult interaction leads to child empathy, it was a process of connection to one another, each of us learning from one another. Lily's parents were learning cello technique. Lily was learning to count mixed meter. I was learning a new song by the Portland Cello Project. Simultaneously, each of us was learning about the creativities and expressive intents of one another. There appeared to be, in fact, a process of empathetic creativity, which, as addressed previously, takes place in collaborative creative processes and involves imitation. We saw that as Lily imitated her father counting, teacher imitating Lily's animal sounds and motions. It involves entrainment, each of us swaying bodies and moving together rhythmically, either swaying cellos or moving on the floor. Moments of disinterested pleasure, each engaging at times in our own musical expressions, although these were admittedly interrupted from time to time as adults, not the child, attempted to drive an agenda. Flexibility, teacher changing intended activities, such as cello playing, to instead crawl on the floor with Lily. Ambiguity, that was nonverbal and individualized instances of physical or vocal reaction to the music. We saw the growls. There were even instances of the sixth ultimate or experience of empathic creativity, in which adults and child recognized the expressions of others, including through eye contact and smiles and laughter, while continuing to create our own individual responses to the music. Yet in this engagement, music making was not occurring explicitly for empathy's sake. Music and musical attunement were occurring as we listened to the music and played with and learned from one another. Was Lily's hugging of my legs at the end of the lesson related to some sort of lesson she had learned about pro-social behavior? I don't know. It may likely have been a result of the fact that she had a musical playmate who had come to visit and was now saying goodbye. Are these things related? Laurel Trainer's research suggests that music connection can have an impact on later behavior. Yet for all the research we have on the development of pro-social behaviors in children through music learning, it might behoove us to study the pro-social development of adults as they interact with young musicians. How do these interactions help us attune to children, to music, to one another? How do our interactions with children inspire us to be kinder and more socially mature people within and beyond these sacred musical spaces? A decade ago, I wrote a narrative about how a different 4-year-old cello student had taught me more about teaching than I had taught him about cello. In this piece, I candidly share my arrogance, mistakes, and personal learning experiences while discussing how my perfectionism and need to control every aspect of those Suzuki lessons clashed with young Danny's desire to express himself musically. He was stuck, I was stuck, and stickers didn't help. I concluded that narrative like this. Last summer, 4 years after I gave Danny his last lesson, his mother called me to see how she might find a new home for 2 cellos that frankly had been sitting in the closet, untouched for years now. Danny had moved on to a keen interest in fire trucks and then dinosaurs. He could tell you any detail you'd ever want to know about any kind of terrible lizard that had ever walked the planet. So what's it to me? Should I care? Perhaps it was just a phase, just like Danny's father's friends suggested. We all go through them, right? We all get passionate about things, and then something happens to either kindle that fire further or blow it out. I can't go back now. If I could, I would do things differently. I would play with Danny. I would play my cello for him and with him and answer his questions and show him things that he was interested in, that he asked me about. And I'd care much less about the end result. I'd just enjoy every moment with him and make music in our own kind of way. It would be less about cello and more about connection. Much of that desire for connection with Danny influenced my later work with Lily, where I engaged in a much more interactive and semi-structured play approach to cello teaching. However, it seems that even in my desire to offer her more of a flexible music and learning environment, I still naively assumed that I was somehow interacting with her in a way that would raise her up to be a more dignified human being, as if I had already arrived at that place and needed to bring her up to my alleged level of civility. However, in truth, Lily was teaching me what it meant to attune to the expressions of a child and to other adults. And even now, these videos and journals of our time together are still teaching me about the nature of musical empathy, of empathic creativity. As Diana Dansereau has articulated, quote, children often turn out to be far more musically capable than thought, and the presumption of competence can reveal even more capabilities, end quote. Perhaps it is so that children are already far more socially capable than thought, which I have learned to recognize if I practice self and other awareness and have the disposition to notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful, wonderful talk, and for those explorations that you've started for us today. I think I'd like to ask you, would you like to take questions? Would you like to open the floor to discussion with a prompt? Attendees, if you're here in real time, please, I think, feel free to start putting some questions in the chat.
Yes, I think if there are some reflections, we can certainly start with those. A prompt we might start with might be, what have students taught you that surprised you? You can take that prompt, or if you want to focus more specifically on a question you have, or a thought you have, or clarification you'd like from the presentation, I'm happy to engage in that as well. Either of those would be fine. What have students taught you? What has surprised you? Or any other question or thought or reflection. Sarah.
So I'm going to talk because I'm on my phone and I was able to put my camera back on because I settled into my office. I was on the road coming to my house and was listening though and was loving it. So it's wonderful, Dr. Hendrick, just amazing when you tell all these things, because so much comes to me of me teaching very young private students, very young. I had a 4 and a 5-year-old piano student that I really had to work hard to, they were brothers, to find how to teach them very basic piano with the attention, with just like Lily wanting to get up and, slide down the piano and under the piano and all that. But what I found with my very young students was how compassion is reflected in a lesson. Like how, honestly, if you said, what are some adjectives you could use to define compassion in your lesson that are examples, I would say listening and not talking so much. But I allowed time and space to be, which meant that if it stopped, so be it. If they needed a break, so be it. I didn't feel like I had to, okay, get all of this in every time. So that flexibility was very important. And then for me, what I learned is that silliness is okay, and laughing together is okay, even if it has nothing to do with music. And I share the sentiment. I have a little girl named Reese, and when I know that she's happy and that I've conveyed music to her, is when she comes up before she leaves and gives me a big old hug and just holds on. She doesn't let go. And first when she did it, I was like, oh, okay. But now she does it all the time. And it just confirms to me every time she does that I did okay today, that she's okay. She's leaving happy, and it fulfills, my part as being a teacher, that she left musical and happy. And that's all we can ask for, right? Is that they're happy.
I don't know if you saw the smiles among everyone here when you said silliness is okay. That just sparked the energy and the joy even here with us. And so that term joy that this Lily, future Dr. Grant, mentioned to us today. And yeah, that's what it's about. Christy has written in the chat, I'll read this. One thing I'm continually reminded of in lessons is the wonderment, yes, of learning, the curiosity that children bring to the learning process. Christy, absolutely. And I would add to this, something I'm exploring in my own research is this wonderment and curiosity of the teacher as well. As I have written on patience, I remember it was Pat actually years ago who quoted Suzuki calling patience controlled frustration, and in a teacher training years ago. And I think about what patience might be if it equated to curiosity. If those moments when students seem to be out of control, or, if we, rather than taking it personally and being worried about the control issue, if we also become curious and wonder in those moments and say, what's happening? I wonder why, what that can do for us in those moments. So thank you so much, Christy, for bringing that up. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Anyone else?
So I'd like to share, just your presentation reminded me of just what happened yesterday between me and my 6-year-old girl. She's learning piano. I'm a cellist, and for my students, I'm always in the music educator side, and I try to just practice my own teaching philosophy, and be give freedoms and be a very nice teacher. For my girls, sometimes really hard to be patient and do the same. And yesterday we were she was practicing row your boats with 2 hands. She was so excited to play with 2 hands. She started from the lowest highest octave, and then moving to lower, having so much fun. And then I just and then we she has an upcoming concert, and I was we have limited time, and so can you stop there and practice what you need to do for the concert? And she was sad, and all of that. Now and then I totally forgot what happened. And then while I was listening to you, oh my gosh, I missed this very important piece in my very own child. So yeah, it's really, yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say, but you reminded me of so many things that is very important, but then I forgotten it for like quite a bit. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the beautiful presentation and the talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And I will just say that a big, big part of compassion is self-compassion and a recognition that we all have mistakes and we are all learning. And that's the joy of this, you know, as we're being compassionate with others, we can say, gosh, I am learning as well. So I try to keep that in mind. Makes a big difference. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yoon, your comment made me think of what I typed in the chat earlier, that Estelle Jorgensen's quote about how we don't do this work because what was there before, you know, I don't want to misquote it, but that it is work and that we strive for this, and even making space for the joy and the play, and as Sarah said, the silliness can require ongoing effort and recommitment, especially when times are hard. So, you know, Karen, I appreciated you grounding us in that very open and caring and compassionate framing of the work that we do. I see a hand up from Lily.
First of all, thank you for the great talk. I don't know if it's normal, but I teared up a few times. So anyway, so from your talk and also from my own work, I feel like, you know, the more you learn, the more you feel like you need to learn. And to be truly empathetic, you have to know so much about your students, about different sort of social forces, that sort of thing. So my question, not just for Karen, but for everyone is, do you ever feel kind of crippled by this feeling of, I don't know enough to be compassionate, to be, especially in a setting where you don't have just one kid, like because I teach classroom and I'm not a Suzuki teacher, but I'm a Suzuki parent now. And I totally echo what you know, saying, which is just feeling like I'm a better teacher than I'm a mom, but I hear what Karen is saying about, being compassionate towards myself, but I wonder if anyone could share like this feeling, like sometimes I do feel that way, like I'm crippled by my own sense of, ignorance. I feel like I don't know enough about her background to be able to teach better, to like in a group setting, especially when I'm constrained by so many things, time and concerts, dates, and things like that. Like, how do you deal with that?
I am sure everyone here would say yes, absolutely. Yes, you're so right. You said it so beautifully. The more you learn and realize, the more you know there is more to learn. And I think of the brilliant pedagogues who are here, and I'll point to Pat again, who's been doing Suzuki teacher training for I don't even know how long. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Pat, but I imagine you feel that way a lot, even now, that there are times where I'll let you speak.
I actually just this past year, we're doing our program has been asked to do Suzuki in the schools to start a string program for third, fourth, and fifth graders, and all the kids have to be in the strings class. They get to choose what instrument, but they all have to take lessons. And I had a cellist, and I don't get to work with the cellist except for this one time for 45 minutes. And last year, all these kids were on Zoom, and so their ability is, all over. And we didn't get the structure of teaching them appropriate behavior and that kind of thing. But this one fella who's in fourth grade just gave me a run for my well, actually there were four of them who I really felt it was time to retire about March, because I could not draw on any of my past experience to help these kids, because they were destroying the learning activities for the other kids I mean, it was a whole discipline thing. So yeah, I totally felt, and the only thing that made me feel a little bit better, but didn't solve anything, was to be told by the principal that all those kids had been in her office multiple times during the week. But um, I really, I really tried to connect with this boy, because this one boy who was just kind of defiant. And I felt that that was the thing that was calling me. And that's what I had with the violin students that I taught, because I knew them well because I spent more time, but I didn't know this boy well. And that personal connection, um, it never really happened, although I had made a number of times before after class to try to get him to know him a little bit better, but also learned about his home life where he has no boundaries either. So it was just really hard. But yeah, and that was the thing that I struggled with the most, Lily, was trying to be empathetic to his situation, and that he was doing maybe the best that he could do, even though I felt it was totally destructive to my classes. And that's and having a concert and all those kinds of pressures all, yeah, add to that.
And if we had time, I'm sure we could all go around and talk about those moments when we feel that way. And I hope this isn't too much of a personal thing with you, Lily, but just to, you know, Juliet Hess very well. She and I have each other's texts, and on a regular basis text each other and say, I feel like an imposter, help me. And the other one says, you're not an imposter, you can do this. And so there are these moments where, you know, and Sarah, your work in performance anxiety, you know, your interest in that is related to this. I think it's the same issue. And this is why I followed up the performance anxiety book with compassionate music teaching, because there's this false belief that everyone's telling that somebody has it perfect and that we all need to figure it out and to be like this person. And that is the biggest lie that we need to get rid of. We are all struggling, we're all swimming, and each of us has different strengths. And what happens often is we compare our weaknesses to other people's strengths. And then, you know, we never see what's really going well. So when we can be honest and open with one another, then we can really support each other. And I think that's what Suzuki's approach is all about, that cooperation versus competition, that we are supporting each other and being vulnerable to say, I don't know what to do, even when we're teaching a student, and working through those things with this curiosity that Christy has reminded us of. Christy.
Maybe if I can tack on to what Lily and Karen and Pat, you mentioned, because I can relate to everything that has been mentioned today, and feeling like, whoa, what do I do now? I'm at the bottom of my toolbox. I don't have anything left. But I think one thing that's given me hope over the years is the fact that Dr. Suzuki himself was always searching for a new idea, and he didn't have the answers. And, you know, he started his career work in, you know, in the last half of his life, essentially. And that's always given me hope to think that there's not a finite point to learning, which we all know with our continuous education thoughts with the Suzuki method and the philosophy. But I think I've often come back to, okay, a new idea. Let me brainstorm a new idea, so that when a week from now, when I go into that same situation, what could I do just a little bit differently to maybe nudge that student 1% farther along on their learning curve, and try something. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but I just continually try to think of those new ideas like Dr. Suzuki himself was always doing.
Oh my goodness, Christy, thank you so much for bringing that up. I remember some conversations at some point, it may even have been at IRSTE, where we said, if Suzuki were still alive, what would the Suzuki approach look like? Would it be so canonized? Would we be so concerned about this one right way to do things? What would it look like if we were continuing to ask these questions? So I hope that's not anathema for me to say, Pat.
No, we had that discussion. I mean, I remember having that discussion when I was on the board for the Suzuki Association, you know.
Mm.
And you can teach anything Suzuki way.
Yeah.
I'll just say one other little point that Christy reminded me, and to kind of finish maybe what I was saying before about this young man. And I think that your point about authenticity and really being true to yourself is so important, because the one thing that I always hoped was that through all of our interactions, I hope this boy knew that I cared about him, not him as a cellist, but him, and what he could become, you know, if he develops the some of the tools that he needs to develop. But and that's the other balance that I think we have to have is we need to let the kids play. I'd be interested in your comments on this, Karen, is we need to let the kids play. We need to be in the play with them and take advantage of those moments. And at the same time, we're also needing to help them develop that self-regulation and knowing when to focus and when we can have fun and learning some of those boundaries too. And that's a lot to balance along with teaching them technique and musicality and all the other musical things that we need to teach. So
Yeah, I when I was working on my PhD years ago, I had a professor who was anti-Suzuki, and he gave me a title for an article that he wanted me to write for the class. It was Suzuki approach, developmentally appropriate, question mark. And so I went to task and wrote this. It's been published since in the American String Teacher Journal, but it's called flexible purposing. And it talks about this. I always know I have this idea of what, and I think this is, you know, this is Suzuki speaking. I know what the Dvorak cello concerto sounds like, but in the meantime, I have someone who may want to play around with, you know, the bow in various ways. So we might have sound explorations together. And then of course we can say, oh, wow, listen to that one you just did. Look at what happened to your string. It's resonating. Oh my goodness. Now, you know, so there's always this, I'm keeping that end goal in mind while continuing to play in those various ways. So that's my term for it, flexible purposing. But I think that's kind of where you're going, because it isn't just anarchy. It's not just chaos that we're just, you know, throwing balls around in the room or, you know, having sword fights. But there's this play that is, you know, with my awareness as a teacher that I'm bringing into that space, but never forcing an agenda, if that makes sense.
I love that, Karen, and I love that take on sort of the vision of the accomplished learner. Like, how can you be flexible to get there? That's neat. Sarah, I thought I saw a hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to comment because this is so wonderful, but so many things come to my mind, just like I'm sure it does to everyone listening. And I think the one thing that I've learned over years of teaching and getting older and wiser as I've taught and learning from my mistakes is that imposter syndrome that you were talking about, Pat. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do things wrong. And I think if we look at play is full of mistakes. Play is not perfect either, right? Play is supposed to be full of how many kids do things that are wrong and go, oops, I didn't mean to do that. And then they run on and they don't think about it again, where we go, oh my God, I did that. So I think we're hard on ourselves as adults because we've forgotten that it's okay to make mistakes and be okay with it. And to address what you said, and in a group setting, I think too, we have to go back to the fact, and as hard as it is in a group, each child is different, and how what works for one might not work for the other. And in a group setting, how do you make that decision that, okay, do you say, well, 3/4 of the class this might work for, and the other quarter it might not to? How do I address those that it doesn't work for? And all I can think is, can we like somehow figure that out after class? You know, for those that it didn't work with, can you address them like that versus thinking, okay, I failed? Because I think, again, when we go back to classroom or private study, going back to each person individually saying, you know what, I see that didn't really work for you. You know, I'm going to find something that probably will work for you. You know, I don't know. I'm just kind of talking out loud, but I just know I just reinvented over and over my ideas until they work and gone, okay, that was ridiculous. When kids look at you like, what are you doing? Like that, you know it's not working, right? Because they're like laughing at you. And then I just kind of thought, okay, that was dumb, but it worked. You know, I just feel like you have to do that, right? Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Karen, any final thoughts to conclude as we're in our last few minutes of our time together?
Just a big thank you to everyone for being here and for this opportunity, which has allowed me to learn some new things and consider some new ideas. It's always a joy. So thank you.
And it was a joy to have you, Karen, with us, and I want to thank you for your insightful and inspiring keynote today. We really, I think I speak for all of us in saying that we really enjoyed it, and you gave us lots of food to think, food for thought. So we'll be sending an email to everyone for that will contain the links to all of the videos from the 3 days, and as well as a feedback link, and Kate has put it in the chat, so you can copy and paste that or click right to it. I'm not sure. I think we can go right to it to give us some feedback on our days together. And that includes those people who are listening to the recording. Please give us your feedback on these sessions as well. I would especially like to thank Yoon Cho, and Kate, who are both on our ERSTI research team. We're working on our second manuscript to hopefully we'll get that published. And so you can watch for that announcement on our website. And I especially want to thank Kate for serving as co-coordinator these past 8 years. We've really clicked as a team, and I appreciate the skill set she brings and who she is as a person. And so I just want to personally thank you, Kate, for doing this with me all the time. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Pat. You've caught me by surprise. So that's so kind. I will say to those of you who are here today that 2 years ago in 2020 was the 30th anniversary of the IRSTE. And when this event was supposed to have happened in person in 2020, we had planned a number of celebrations and honors to recognize the work that Pat has done for decades to advance ERSTI. And that opportunity sort of was taken from us because of the moment that we find ourselves in. So we were so pleased to iterate and pivot and move online, and everyone pivoted till they were dizzy. And here we are again in 2022. So thank you to those of you who have joined us. We've got folks from different countries. Karen is joining us from a different continent. It's been a pleasure and an honor to co-coordinate with Pat these past 5 years. Karen, as co-coordinator before me, left enormous shoes to fill. So all that to say, in our last minute, thank you for joining us today. Thank you to those of you who joined us earlier this week. As Pat said, the information will go out in a follow-up email. You'll have links to the recordings, links to the proceedings, and we so appreciate you coming together to learn and to share with us in this space.
Ditto to that. And just one other reminder is that we've updated the bibliography. So visit ersti.org and you can see the proceedings and the schedule and the bibliography and any other publications that are out there. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful weekend, and especially thank you to Karen again. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.